The city of ruthless was built from black stone and silver towers, each one guarded by the Empress's soldiers. On the central plaza, thousands gathered to witness the trial of the traitor. Chains clinked as they dragged her forward, her blue skin catching the cold light. Every eye in the crowd followed her, yet no one dared to speak. Treason in ruthless had only one sentence. Her name was Serenia, the Empress's own blood cousin. Once loved by the people, now accused of conspiring with rebels. The crowd whispered, but the whispers stopped when the guards forced her to her knees. The High Arbiter read the charges in a voice that carried like steel through the air. The executioner waited nearby, his weapon humming softly. Death was no longer a distant thought for her. It was here, breathing on her neck. She had been silent since her capture. She refused to beg for her life, refused to look afraid. Her glowing eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. In her mind, she replayed the moment of her arrest, the soldiers breaking through her chambers, the shouts, the crack of the stun blades. She knew the Empress wanted this spectacle. The public humiliation was as important as the execution itself. Then something changed. A murmur rippled through the plaza, growing louder with every second. From the edge of the crowd, a human walked forward. The people of ruthless had seen humans before, but never one so bold. He did not kneel, did not avert his gaze. His boots struck the stone with a steady rhythm as he approached the line of armed guards. His presence felt like a blade cutting through the air. The guards raised their weapons, warning him to stop. He did not. His voice carried across the square as he demanded to speak. The High Arbiter glared, insulted that an off-worlder would interrupt an imperial execution. "This is not your concern," the Arbiter said coldly. The human smiled faintly, but there was nothing soft in his eyes. "It is now," he replied. Serenia's heart thudded in her chest, though her face betrayed nothing. She did not know him, yet the way he stood, the way he faced the soldiers, was unlike anything she had seen. He was not armed, yet he radiated danger. The crowd grew restless. Whispers turned into questions. Why was a human interfering? What did he want with a condemned traitor? The Empress's soldiers shifted nervously, unsure if they should strike him down or wait for orders. The human stepped closer until he stood before the High Arbiter. "Release her," he said. The square went silent, the weight of his words falling over everyone present. The Arbiter laughed, a short, cool sound. "Her life is forfeit. Who are you to demand otherwise?" The human's answer was simple, yet it froze the air. "I claim her," he said, as if those words alone carried unshakable authority. In ruthless law, there was an ancient custom, older than the Empress's throne. If someone claimed a condemned in the name of life debt, the trial could be halted until the claim was reviewed. It was a law few remembered and fewer dared to use. But the human's voice left no room for doubt. The Arbiter's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The guards looked to one another, their grips tightening on their weapons. Serenia lifted her head for the first time, her glowing eyes meeting his. She did not understand why. But in that moment, hope returned. Asterisk, the Arbiter's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "This law is not for outsiders," he said, his words sharp and deliberate. But the human did not flinch. His stance was steady, his gaze fixed on Serenia. He spoke again, his tone unyielding. "The law is for anyone who knows it. And I do." The crowd leaned forward, their curiosity overtaking their fear. Something rare was unfolding before them. The guards surrounding Serenia shifted uneasily. This was not the usual rhythm of an execution. The human's voice carried a weight that unsettled them, though they could not explain why. Serenia studied him closely now, searching for any sign of deception. She found none. His posture was calm, yet every movement seemed deliberate, like a warrior measuring each step. The Arbiter glanced toward the palace, awaiting unseen orders from above. From the highest balcony, The Empress herself stepped into view. Her golden robes shimmered in the cold light, her expression unreadable. "Who dares interfere with my judgment?" she asked, her voice both regal and dangerous. The human tilted his head upward to meet her gaze. "I do," he replied without hesitation. "And by your own laws you cannot deny my claim without hearing it." The murmurs in the crowd swelled into a low roar. The Empress raised her hand, and the plaza fell silent once more. She studied the human for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. "You risk much, off-worlder. Do you know who she is?" she asked. The human's answer came swiftly. "I know enough," he said. "Enough to know her death will cost you more than her life ever could." The words hit the air like a challenge, one that no one had dared speak to the Empress before. Serenya's breath caught in her throat. She had been ready to meet death with dignity, but this human's defiance stirred something deep within her. The Empress descended the steps toward the plaza, her golden robes trailing behind her. The crowd stepped back as she passed, lowering their heads. "Very well," the Empress said finally. "State your claim before all of ruthless, so there is no doubt in the record." The human stepped forward, closing the last distance to stand between Serenia and the executioner. "I saved her life once," he began. His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving the Empress's. "Years ago, during the siege of Dareth Station, she was injured. I was there. I carried her out while your soldiers retreated. She owes me a life debt by your own customs." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The arbiter's eyes widened. It was a detail no one had ever heard before. Serenya's mind raced. As the memory surfaced faces in smoke, hands lifting her to safety, a voice telling her she would live, the Empress's gaze shifted to Serenia. "Is this true?" she asked coldly. Serenia hesitated, her pride warring with her instinct for survival. Slowly, she nodded. "It is true," she said. "Without him, I would have died that day." The crowd reacted with shock and disbelief. The life debt law was old, but it was absolute. To deny it would be to shatter one of the deepest traditions of ruthless. The Empress's jaw tightened. "This changes nothing of her crime," the arbiter protested, stepping forward. "Treason cannot be erased by past deeds." But the Empress raised her hand to silence him. Her eyes never left the human. "If I honor this law, she will be yours to claim," she said. "Her life, her fate, her future will belong to you." The human nodded once. "Then I claim her before your people and your throne." His words echoed across the plaza, sealing the moment. Serenia felt the weight of the chains on her wrists, but also the shift in the air around her. The executioner stepped back, uncertain. The guards lowered their weapons, though their eyes stayed fixed on the Empress. The human reached out his hand toward her, not as a rescuer, but as someone who had already decided her life was worth more than her death. The Empress studied them both for a final silent moment before she turned away. "Release her," the Empress commanded. The chains fell to the ground with a heavy clang. Serenia stood slowly, her gaze locked on the human. Around them, the crowd watched in stunned silence, knowing they had just witnessed a challenge to power unlike any in living memory. The human did not smile, but there was a quiet resolve in his eyes. Whatever had begun here was far from over. The plaza slowly emptied after the Empress's command, but the weight of what had just happened hung in the air. Serenia walked beside the human, her wrists still sore from the chains. The guards watched them pass, but none dared to intervene. The arbiter's glare followed them until they turned down a narrow stone corridor leading away from the execution grounds. The human moved with quiet confidence, as though each step had already been planned. Serenia finally broke her silence. "You have taken a great risk for someone you do not know," she said, her voice measured. He glanced at her, his expression calm. "I know enough," he replied simply. "And I do not like to watch the powerful crush those who cannot fight back." His words were sharp, but they carried no pity. She studied him closely, noting the faint scars across his jaw and the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. This was not a man unused to danger. Why claim me at all? She asked, her tone edged with suspicion. The life-debt law is old, but no outsider should know it exists. His mouth curved slightly. I make it my business to know the laws of those who think themselves above them. There was no arrogance in his voice, only certainty. They reached a quiet courtyard, hidden from the main streets. The air here was cooler, filled with the scent of silver-leaf trees. Serenia leaned against a pillar, her mind still spinning from the sudden shift in her fate. You have given me freedom, she said, but it will not last. The Empress will find another way to take my life. The human stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then you will have to stay alive long enough to make her regret trying. His tone was matter-of-fact, as though survival was not a question, but a task. Serenia's lips tightened. You speak as though you have faced her kind before. He nodded once. Power is the same in every empire. They rule through fear, and fear is a weapon that can be taken from them. His eyes locked with hers, and she saw in them a steady, dangerous resolve. For the first time in days, she felt the faintest thread of control returning. A shadow passed over the courtyard as 3 armored figures approached from the far gate. Their movements were precise, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. Serenia tensed immediately. Imperial hunters, she whispered. The human's stance shifted subtly, his weight balanced, his hand hovering near the knife at his belt. The hunters stopped several paces away, their leader stepping forward. The Empress grants you your claim, the leader said, but she demands you leave Ruthless within the hour. The human didn't move. And if I refuse? He asked evenly. The hunter's visor reflected the silver leaf branches above. Then your claim will be void, and the traitor will be executed before nightfall. The air between them grew tight, as if the entire courtyard was holding its breath. Serenia's pulse quickened, but she said nothing. The human's gaze stayed locked on the hunter for a long moment before he spoke again. We will leave, he said finally. The hunters turned and left without another word, their boots striking the stone in unison. As soon as they were gone, Serenia exhaled slowly. You would leave so easily? She asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. He met her gaze. I said we would leave, not that we would run. She blinked, realizing there was a difference. You mean to fight them? He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her enough. They began moving through the back streets of Ruthless, avoiding the main roads where patrols were thick. The human moved like he had walked these streets 100 times before, turning down alleys and slipping through hidden gates. Serenia followed in silence, her mind racing. She still didn't know his name, and yet she was bound to him now. Not by chains but by law. It was a bond as dangerous as it was unbreakable. Finally, they reached the outer gates of the city. Beyond them lay the shadowed expanse of the lowlands, a place Serenia had not seen since childhood. The guards here were few, their attention lax. The human paused, scanning the terrain ahead. We'll need to move fast once we're outside, he said quietly. Serenia glanced back at the city walls, knowing that crossing them would mean leaving everything she had ever known. Still, the choice was no longer hers to make. The lowlands stretched before them like a dark ocean of grass and stone. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of rain and distant fires. Serenia hesitated at the threshold of the city gate, her eyes fixed on the faint horizon. The human's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife as he scanned the path ahead. Without a word, he stepped forward, and she followed. The road curved between crumbling stone markers etched with the symbols of ancient houses long forgotten. Serenia glanced at them, recalling the story she had heard as a child. This land was once home to those who defied the first Empress, she murmured. The human gave a brief nod. "Then perhaps it's fitting we pass through here," he said. His voice carried no fear, only the steady calm of someone who had walked into danger before. They traveled in silence for a time, the only sound the crunch of gravel under their boots. Serenia found herself glancing at him when she thought he wouldn't notice. His stride was purposeful, his eyes always moving. "You still haven't told me your name," she said. He didn't slow his pace. "Kalen," he replied simply. She repeated it quietly, letting the sound anchor in her mind. From behind them, a faint hum broke the quiet. Kalen stopped instantly, tilting his head to listen. Serenia turned and saw small specks of light in the distance, growing brighter. "Patrol drones," she said. Kalen's jaw tightened. "We need cover." He led her off the main road toward a cluster of jagged rock formations that jutted like broken teeth from the earth. The shadows there swallowed them whole. The drones swept overhead moments later, their searchlights slicing through the night. Serenia pressed her back against the cold stone, her breath steady but slow. Kalen watched the lights move past, his body still as carved granite. Only when the hum faded did he step back onto the road. "They will not stop," Serenia said. Quietly, "They will hunt us until we are caught." Kalen looked over his shoulder at her, his expression unreadable. "Then we will give them something to regret." As they moved on, the terrain shifted into rolling hills dotted with silverleaf groves. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, painting the ground in shifting patterns. Serenia felt the weight of exhaustion beginning to pull at her, but Kalen kept the pace steady. "How far do you plan to go?" she asked. "Far enough that the Empress cannot reach you in a single order," he answered. The certainty in his tone was as unshakable as the ground beneath them. They came to a narrow bridge spanning a chasm cut deep into the earth. The wind here was stronger, carrying whispers from the depths below. Kalen crossed first, his steps deliberate. Serenia followed, her gaze locked on the far side. Halfway across, she heard movement behind them. Figures emerged from the darkness at the mouth of the bridge, armored and armed. "Hunters," she said sharply. Kalen turned, his eyes narrowing as he drew his knife. The first hunter stepped forward, his visor gleaming in the moonlight. "You were told to leave the city," he said. Kalen's grip on the knife tightened. "We are leaving," he replied. "Just not by your path." The hunter raised his weapon, the hum of its power cell cutting through the wind. Serenia's heart pounded as the space between them grew tense. Kalen shifted his stance, ready to strike if needed. Without warning, Kalen lunged, closing the distance before the hunter could fire. The blade flashed in the moonlight, striking with precision. The hunter fell, his weapon clattering onto the bridge. The others hesitated, their moment of surprise costing them precious seconds. Serenia moved to Kalen's side, her chains gone. But the memory of them still sharp in her mind. "We cannot fight them all here," she said. He nodded once, already stepping toward the far side of the bridge. They ran the last stretch, the hunters shouting behind them. As soon as they reached the other side, Kalen slashed the bridge's support ropes. The structure groaned, then fell away into the chasm, severing the only direct route the hunters could use. The sound echoed through the night like a final warning. Serenia stood beside him, breathing hard, her eyes locked on the darkness where the bridge had been. For the first time, she felt the faint spark of control returning to her life. The wind swept over the chasm, carrying the fading shouts of the hunters. Serenia stood still for a moment, her breath slowing as the sound of pursuit disappeared into the distance. Kalen turned from the edge and motioned for her to follow. "We cannot stop now," he said. His tone left no room for hesitation. She fell into step beside him, her mind replaying the moment he cut the bridge. They moved into thicker forest, where the silver leaf groves gave way to towering ironbark trees. The ground was soft with fallen leaves, muffling their steps. Moonlight barely touched the forest floor, and the air smelled of damp soil and resin. Serenia glanced up at the twisting branches overhead, remembering old tales of spirits said to dwell in such places. Kalen did not seem concerned by the stories. His focus remained ahead, scanning for threats. After an hour, they reached a clearing where a small stream wound between moss-covered rocks. Kalen knelt by the water, filling a metal flask. Serenia watched him work, noting how he moved with quiet efficiency. "You have done this before," she said. He glanced up briefly. "More times than I can count." His answer carried a weight she could not yet name. She wondered how many escapes he had made, and how many had ended in blood. They drank in silence before Kalen led them onward, following the stream deeper into the woods. The forest grew denser, forcing them to weave around thick roots and low branches. Serenia's legs ached, but she did not complain. The ache was better than the cold grip of chains. Every step away from Vrithis felt like a threat of the Empress's power snapping loose. Kalen seemed to sense her thoughts, but said nothing. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth made him raise a hand for her to stop. He crouched low, eyes fixed on a shadow moving between the trees. Serenia followed his gaze, catching a glimpse of a figure cloaked in dark fabric. The figure stepped into a shaft of moonlight, revealing a face lined with scars and eyes that gleamed with recognition. "Kalen," the stranger said, his voice low. "You're far from where you should be." Kalen stood slowly, his posture tense but not hostile. "And you're still breathing," he replied. Serenia looked between them, sensing a history. She did not understand. The stranger's gaze shifted to her, lingering for a moment, before returning to Kalen. "The Empress's hunters are sweeping the lowlands," he said. "If you're here, you have something worth protecting." His tone made it clear he was speaking about her. "Will you help us?" Kalen asked plainly. The stranger hesitated before nodding. "I owe you that much," he said. "But you'll need to move quickly. They'll close the gap by nightfall." Without another word, he turned and led them through a narrow path hidden behind a wall of tangled vines. Serenia followed, keeping close to Kalen as the forest closed in around them. The path led to a concealed hollow, where the air was warmer and the ground sloped gently downward. In the center stood a cluster of small shelters made from woven reeds and mud. A handful of people moved between them, their faces wary but curious. The stranger spoke quietly to one of them, who disappeared into a shelter and returned with bundles of dried meat and fresh water. "Take what you need," the stranger said. "But leave before the moon sets." Serenia accepted the food with a quiet nod. The warmth of the hollow and the stillness of the camp made her realize how exhausted she truly was. Kalen remained standing, his eyes on the narrow path they had entered through. He was already thinking of their next move. "You never stop watching," she said softly. He glanced at her without answering, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly before fading again. When they were ready, the stranger pressed a small carved token into Kalen's hand. "If you find the old roads, this will keep the sentries from stopping you," he said. Kalen gave a single nod of thanks. Serenia watched the exchange, wondering how many debts and alliances this human carried with him. As they left the hollow, the sound of the forest returned to distant owls, the rustle of leaves, and the soft crunch of their steps. The night felt heavier, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath for what came next. The forest thinned as they moved toward the edge of the lowlands. The air grew colder, carrying the faint metallic scent of rain. Serenia's steps slowed as she realized the trees ahead gave way to open ground. Kalen stopped beside her, scanning the horizon. "The old roads should be near," he said. She followed his gaze, seeing nothing but faint shapes in the mist. They descended a slope into a shallow valley, where the ground was broken by ancient stonework. Faded carvings lined the edges of a road that had not been used in centuries. Serenia traced her fingers over one of the stones, feeling the deep grooves worn by time. "These were built by the first free clans," she said quietly. Kalen nodded. "Once, then they will serve us better than the Empress's paths." His voice carried the certainty of someone who trusted forgotten places. As they walked, the mist grew thicker, muffling sound and hiding the road ahead. Kalen kept to the center, his eyes alert for movement. Serenia stayed close, her hand brushing the carved token the stranger had given them. "Will this really keep the sentries from stopping us?" she asked. "It will make them think twice," he replied. His tone was calm, but she caught the faint tension beneath it. A shadow appeared in the mist, tall and unmoving. As they drew closer, the outline sharpened into the form of an armored sentry. His spear was tipped with a blade that gleamed faintly in the muted light. "State your purpose," the sentry demanded. Kalen reached into his cloak and held out the carved token. The sentry studied it for a long moment before stepping aside. "You may pass," he said. His eyes, however, followed them until they vanished into the mist. Beyond the sentry's post, the road widened into an open stretch flanked by low stone walls. The mist began to lift, revealing rolling hills dotted with ruins. Serenia's pace quickened as she took in the sight. "I never thought I would walk these roads," she murmured. Kalen glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "You speak as though they are forbiddens." She met his gaze. "They are. The Empress calls them cursed because they once carried armies that defied her ancestors." The quiet between them was broken by the sound of hooves on stone. Kellen's hand went to his knife instantly. From behind a rise, a group of mounted hunters emerged, their armor marked with the imperial crest. Serenia's pulse quickened. "They found us," she said. Kellen's eyes flicked over the terrain, searching for an advantage. "Not yet," he answered. "But they will if we keep to the open road." Without hesitation, he veered toward the nearest ruin. The ruin's walls were half collapsed, but they offered enough cover to break the hunter's line of sight. Kalen led Serenia inside, guiding her through a series of narrow passages. The sound of hooves grew louder, then began to fade as the hunters passed. Serenia pressed her back against the cold stone, exhaling slowly. "You seem to know exactly where to go," she said. Kalen gave a faint shrug. "Old places have fewer eyes watching." They waited until the sound of pursuit had vanished completely. Kalen stepped out first, scanning the road before signaling for her to follow. The hills beyond the ruin were steeper, dotted with jagged rocks. Moving quickly, they climbed to a ridge that overlooked the road below. From here, they could see the hunters slowing, their mounts uneasy on the broken stones. "They don't know which way we went," Serenia whispered. Kellen's eyes stayed fixed on them. "Let's keep it that way." As the day wore on, clouds gathered overhead, turning the light to a muted gray. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something sharper smoke. Kalen stopped, tasting the air. "There's a camp ahead," he said. Serenia frowned. "Friendly?" He didn't answer, only began moving faster. Soon they saw the faint outline of tents through the shifting light. The camp was small, guarded by figures in worn armor without the imperial crest. The guards at the edge of the camp raised their weapons as Kalen and Serenia approached. One of them stepped forward, his expression wary. "Travelers rarely come this way," he said. Kalen met his gaze evenly. "We're looking for shelter before the rain." The guard studied them for a moment before lowering his weapon. Then, "You'd best come in quickly," he said. "Storm's coming." As they stepped inside the camp, Serenia felt the first cold drops of rain on her skin. The camp was small but well organized, with tents arranged in a wide circle around a central fire pit. The smoke rose straight into the gray sky, carrying the scent of roasting meat and damp wood. Serenia scanned the faces of those within the camp. Most wore patched armor and carried weapons that had clearly seen many battles. Kaelin moved with the ease of someone who knew how to blend in anywhere. A tall woman with short-cropped hair approached them. She carried herself with the confidence of a leader, her eyes sharp as they took in every detail. "You're far from the Empress's roads," she said. Kaelin inclined his head slightly. "That's the idea." The woman's gaze shifted to Serenia, lingering just long enough to make her uneasy. "And she is?" Kaelin's tone was even when he replied. "Someone the Empress wants dead. Which means I intend to keep her alive." The woman studied them both for a long moment before gesturing toward a tent near the fire. "You can rest there until the storm passes," she said. Kaelin gave a brief nod of thanks. Inside the tent, the air was warmer, lit by the dim glow of a lantern. Serenia sat on a folded blanket, stretching her legs. "Do you trust them?" she asked quietly. Kaelin sat opposite her, his knife resting within easy reach. "Trust is a luxury," he said. "I settle for caution." The rain began soon after, drumming steadily against the fabric of the tent. Outside, voices murmured in low tones, carrying just enough to make Serenia strain to listen. She caught fragments mentions of patrols, of hunters moving closer to the old roads. Kaelin's expression darkened. "They've been watching the Empress's forces," he said. "But it also means word of us might already be spreading." Serenia's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. Later, they were invited to share the central fire with the others. The tall woman sat at Kaelin's side, asking careful questions about their route and intentions. Kaelin answered with just enough truth to be believable, leaving out anything that might reveal too much. Serenia listened, watching how easily he controlled the flow of information. She wondered if this skill had saved him more times than his blade. The woman finally leaned back, satisfied for now. When the rain lessened, Kaelin suggested they leave before nightfall. The woman frowned but did not argue. She handed him a small leather pouch. "Dried rations," she said. "The hills ahead are open ground, and the hunters will be less likely to search there during the storm." Kaelin accepted it with a nod. Serenia followed him out of the camp, glancing back once to see the tall woman still watching them from the fire. The storm had washed the air clean, leaving the hills smelling of wet stone and fresh earth. Clouds drifted low over the ridges, masking their movement. Kaelin kept to the higher ground, using the rocks for cover when possible. Serenia's boots slipped once on the slick stone, but Kaelin caught her arm before she could fall. She muttered her thanks, though she suspected he already knew she hated feeling dependent. As they descended toward a narrow pass, Kaelin suddenly stopped. Serenia followed his gaze to a ridge across the way. Dark shapes moved against the skyline, hunters on foot, scanning the valley below. "They're sweeping the pass," Kaelin said. He led her back up the slope, moving quickly but quietly. The hunters hadn't seen them yet, but the open ground meant it was only a matter of time. They reached a cluster of boulders near the ridge's edge. From here, they could see the hunters spreading out, their formation tightening. Kaelin's eyes narrowed as he counted them. "Too many for a fight," he said. Serenia crouched beside him, her heart thudding. "Then we wait?" He shook his head. "No, we find another way through." He pointed toward a faint trail winding into the shadow of the next hill. Without waiting, he began moving toward it. The trail narrowed as they entered a cleft in the hill, the walls rising high on either side. The air was damp and cool, carrying the sound of dripping water. Serenia stayed close behind Kaelin, feeling the stone close in around them. At the far end, the cleft opened into a small sheltered valley, hidden entirely from the surrounding hills. Kaelin paused, scanning the space before stepping inside. For now they were out of sight, but she knew it would not last. The valley was quiet, its grass still wet from the earlier rain. Small streams wound between mossy stones, their sound gentle against the tension in the air. Kaelin moved to the center, scanning every slope and hollow for signs of danger. Serenia followed, her eyes adjusting to the softer light beneath the high rock walls. For a moment, it felt like they had found a place untouched by the Empress's reach. They set up a small fire, hidden from above by the valley's natural overhang. Kalen shared the dried rations given to them at the camp, his movements steady but efficient. Serenia ate in silence, her mind turning over the past days. Every choice, every step, had carried her farther from the life she once knew. Yet with each step, the memory of her chains grew fainter. She looked at Kalen and realized her survival now belonged as much to his will as to her own. The quiet was broken by the sound of shifting stone. Kalen was on his feet instantly, knife in hand. Serenia rose beside him, her pulse quickening. From a narrow gap in the valley wall, a group of figures emerged. Their armor bore no imperial crest, but their weapons were drawn. The leader stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Serenia. "We have been sent to return you to Vrithis," he said coldly. Kalen stepped between them without hesitation. "You will not take her," he said, his voice sharp. The leader's expression did not change. "You have no choice. The Empress has ordered her execution to resume." Kalen's grip tightened on his knife. "Then you will have to go through me." The tension in the air was so thick Serenia could almost feel it against her skin. The armed men shifted, preparing to close the distance. The first one lunged, but Kalen met him with a swift strike, his blade finding the gap between armor plates. The man fell without a sound. The others hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pressed forward. Serenia ducked behind a stone, grabbing a fallen spear as Kalen fought. The clash of steel rang through the valley, sharp and relentless. She watched him move with precision, every strike measured to end a fight quickly. Two more fell, but the leader pressed in hard, forcing Kalen back toward the stream. Serenia stepped out from cover, hurling the spear with all her strength. It struck the leader's shoulder, knocking him off balance. Kalen seized the opening, driving his knife into the man's chest. The leader collapsed, the remaining attackers scattering into the gap they had come from. The sudden silence felt almost unreal after the violence. Kalen lowered his weapon, his breathing steady but heavy. Serenia approached, her hands trembling. "Slightly, you could have been killed," she said. He met her gaze with calm eyes. "So could you. That is why we keep moving." His voice carried no blame, only the truth. She realized then that survival was not a matter of chance for him. It was a matter of choice and action. They packed quickly, leaving the fire to die in the damp air. Kalen led her to a narrow path winding upward along the valley wall. From the top, they could see the hills stretching far into the distance, their slopes fading into the pale light of dawn. "Where will we go now?" Serenia asked. Kalen's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Somewhere the Empress's law cannot reach," he said, as they descended into the next stretch of open ground. Serenia thought of the day she had been dragged to the plaza in chains. Death had been certain. The crowd had been ready to watch her fall. Yet now she walked free, each step carrying her further from that fate. She glanced at Kalen, realizing that his claim had not just saved her life. It had rewritten it entirely. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wildflowers from somewhere ahead. For the first time since her arrest, Serenia felt the stirrings of something beyond survival. It was not safety, not yet, but it was possibility. And in that possibility, there was a future she had not dared to imagine. She walked beside Kalen, the road ahead unknown, but for the first time, it belonged to her as much as to him.